Welcome back to Meaningful Whispers. Tonight you stand at the edge of a monastery cloister bathed in pale moonlight. The air smells faintly of damp stone and distant pine, and you can almost hear the weight of time pressing against these walls. The cobblestones beneath your feet are cool, slightly uneven, as if they too have been humbled by centuries of footsteps. A single candle flickers in an arched window, its glow trembling like a secret not yet ready to be told. And yes, your ego might not make it through unscathed. It rarely survives an encounter with true silence. So before we dive in, tap that like button and subscribe to Cyphoria, only if these midnight mind voyages truly speak to you. And if you're awake in some faraway corner of the world, comment your location and local time. Let's see how far across the map of consciousness we stretch tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift deeper into the cloister. The corridors are long and narrow, their shadows bending like soft ribbons. It's late, past the hours of prayer, yet you hear a faint rhythm of breaths. Slow, measured, almost hypnotic. Medieval monks lived in a symphony of silence. They believed that words, though holy, could clutter the soul. And so they vowed to retreat from them, to let silence wash over the mind like a tide smoothing jagged rocks. But silence is never truly empty, is it? Listen closely and you'll hear it. The subtle scrape of wool robes brushing against wood, the quiet murmur of wind threading through the cloister garden, the slow beating of your own heart. In the absence of chatter, the world grows louder. And here, silence wasn't absence. It was discipline, a tool sharper than any sermon. You inhale gently. Notice how your lungs expand, filling with cool night air. Exhale slower, as if your breath is a secret leaving your body. The monks would have approved of that. Breath is prayer, breath is thought. One monk passes before you, his hood casting half his face in shadow. He doesn't look at you, but his hand moves subtly, two fingers touching his lips, then his chest. A sign, a wordless message. Perhaps peace, perhaps be still. You realize you've stepped into a world where language is no longer spoken, but shown. Historians still argue whether their silence was a true vow or simply a practical ritual. Some say it was to prevent gossip. Others whisper it was a deeper meditation, a way to hear God without distraction. Jung once wrote, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order." And maybe that was their secret, to find order not in sound, but in its deliberate absence. There is a refectory nearby, a long dining hall, dimly lit by narrow windows. You peek inside. Rows of wooden benches sit empty now, but you imagine them filled with monks at mealtime. They ate in perfect quiet, yet their hands moved in graceful shorthand. A tap of fingers on the table meant, "Pass the bread." A tilt of the head meant, "Water, please." There were signs for everything: hunger, gratitude, even amusement. Though laughter itself was forbidden, you feel a flicker of amusement. Imagine an entire dinner party with no one speaking, no awkward small talk, no clinking glasses to fill the gaps, just the soft rhythm of shared necessity. A modern dinner would crumble under such weight. You might joke, silently of course, that maybe the monks invented the first introvert-friendly dining experience. But this is no mere novelty. Silence was power. To control one's tongue is to control one's thoughts. And here in the cloister, under the gentle watch of the moon, you begin to understand. These walls weren't keeping sound out. They were keeping the world's noise from flooding in. As you walk further, you reach the scriptorium, the room where monks copied sacred texts by candlelight. Imagine the scratch of quills on parchment, the faint rustle of pages turning. No one spoke here either, and yet in that silence, entire worlds were written. The paradox lingers in your mind. Silence as a birthplace for words. Pause. Breathe. Feel your shoulders soften as if shedding centuries of restless thought. You might even notice your own heartbeat slowing, syncing with the stillness that once ruled these halls. There is something haunting about this quiet. Not empty, not lonely, just vast, like standing at the edge of an endless sea. You can almost taste the humility it demands, and you suspect that if you stayed here long enough, you'd start to hear the language they never spoke aloud. Because silence isn't nothing. It's full of signals, if you're willing to listen. A soft breeze moves through the corridor, carrying the scent of damp earth and faint candle smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls, one low, lingering note. It feels less like a call and more like a reminder. Time moves differently here. And so, you continue walking, guided not by words but by the quiet pulse of the monastery. You're about to discover how silence became not a void, but a language in itself. You step beyond the scriptorium, deeper into the monastery's labyrinth of shadows. The air cools, drier now, carrying a faint scent of old vellum and beeswax. You run your fingertips along the stone walls, rough, uneven, centuries worn by the gentle touch of other hands. As you move, you begin to notice it. Gestures, glances, subtle patterns of movement that replace the chatter of human voices. Here in the stillness, monks built an unspoken bridge of meaning. They called it Signa, the silent language. You watch two hooded figures cross paths in the hallway. One touches his thumb to his palm, then folds his fingers like a closing flower. The other nods, slipping away toward the kitchen. You don't need a dictionary to guess. It means I need food or perhaps bring bread. This wasn't random mimicry. Medieval monks cataloged entire systems of silent cues. Each abbey had its own lexicon, a living, breathing code. Some signs were practical, pointing to the mouth for hunger, tracing a circle in the air for wine. Others carried nuance. A tap to the forehead could mean contemplation, while a sweep of the hand might signal agreement. Imagine for a moment a world where words vanish, and yet you still manage to laugh without sound, argue without a whisper, apologize with a single gesture. Silence did not erase communication. It sharpened it like a blade honed against stone. Pause. Breathe in slowly. Feel your lungs fill. Then let the air slip out with deliberate slowness. Notice how quiet feels heavier when you truly listen to it, like a velvet curtain settling over your thoughts. And yet, silence was not always peaceful. Historians still debate whether monks embraced it willingly or endured it under strict rule. Was it a gift or a cage? Some abbots saw silence as holy discipline. Others wielded it like a chain, binding restless minds to obedience. And perhaps both are true. After all, Jung reminded us, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Silence can elevate or suffocate, but within this stillness, strange beauty emerged. Picture a monk in the refectory, unable to speak but yearning to share a joke. He'd mimic a gesture, twist it into something absurd. Another monk would bite his lip, shoulders shaking, suppressing forbidden laughter. Silent humor, no punchline, only shared mischief. Even vows of silence couldn't completely quiet the human spark. In one obscure chronicle from Cluny Abbey, a monk describes a moment during Lent when they broke their fast. He wrote, not in words but in carefully drawn sketches, how the brothers spoke their delight through an eruption of exaggerated hand signs. They couldn't say delicious, but they danced their fingers in joy. This is the strange duality of silence. It restricts, yet it also deepens expression. Step quietly now into the chapter house. A circle of wooden benches surrounds you. It's here that monks gathered daily for scripture readings, for confession, for communal decisions. But the meetings began in silence. Each man would bow his head, waiting. Only when the abbot made a specific sign would anyone speak, and even then, only one voice at a time. You sense the weight of such quiet order. It strips away the clutter of overlapping voices, the rush to be heard. In silence, you are forced to listen first. Perhaps that's the true power of a vow of silence, not the absence of noise, but the presence of attention. Breathe again. Let your eyelids soften. Feel your body sinking deeper into stillness, as if your very muscles are learning the monk's discipline. Of course, not everyone welcomed this way of life. There are scattered stories of novices who fled in the night, unable to bear the oppressive quiet. Without words, they felt as if they were dissolving, losing their sense of self. There's something unsettling about silence, isn't there? It makes you confront the endless thoughts swirling in your own mind. Without the distraction of speech, there's nowhere to hide from yourself. And yet, silence also healed. Many monks described it as a medicine for the soul, a way to hear what was always there beneath the noise. They believed that if you stayed quiet long enough, the divine would speak, not in words, but in the rhythm of your breath, the beating of your heart. One monk, centuries ago, wrote in a margin of his manuscript, "Silence is the friend of truth." You wonder what truths he found here, pacing these echoing halls. A faint flicker of candlelight catches your eye. You move closer and find a small alcove with an icon of a saint, the paint cracked and faded. Someone has left a single white feather at its base. No note, no explanation, just the silent language of offering. There is a kind of poetry in this restraint. You think of a modern life, of endless chatter and pings of digital noise, and you can't help but feel a quiet ache for this lost art. To say so much with so little, to let silence mean. You pass another monk. His hand brushes the hem of his robe. Once, twice, 3 times. You don't know what it means, but you feel its intention, and somehow that's enough. As you move onward, you begin to sense the monastery differently. It's no longer just a place. It's a living conversation between stillness and meaning. A reminder that communication doesn't always need sound. A soft gust of wind slips through the cracked window, carrying the scent of pine needles and distant rain. It makes the candle flame waver. In that tiny moment of movement, you catch a glimpse of how monks saw the world. Subtle, fleeting, yet endlessly rich. And so you keep walking, learning to listen with your eyes, your breath, your quiet curiosity. Soon, you'll see how this language became more than survival. It became a form of silent brotherhood. You drift further into the monastery's rhythm of silence, where night lingers longer than the day. The cloistered paths open into a garden, dimly lit by a pale moon. Dew clings to the herbs, each droplet a tiny crystal glimmering in the soft light. You feel the cool air on your skin, and it slows your pulse. For a moment, the world holds its breath. Here in this walled garden, monks tended more than plants. They cultivated memory, ritual, and a quiet defiance of the outside world. Without rivers to carry sound, their voices became rivers of gesture, flowing silently from hand to hand. And yet, this language was not merely for daily needs. It evolved into something subtler, almost mystical, signs for prayers, for sins, for the ineffable. You see a lone monk kneeling by a bed of lavender. He closes his eyes and lifts 2 fingers, slowly drawing them across his lips, then resting his hand over his heart. Was it confession, gratitude, or simply a silent prayer to the night itself? Historians still puzzle over the more esoteric signs, the ones that seem to hold secrets no written text could decode. Some believe they were fragments of an older, hidden tradition, remnants of pagan gestures woven into Christian practice. Others argue they were born from necessity alone, nothing more than pragmatic invention. But necessity has a way of transforming into art. Just as painters once used limited pigments to create masterpieces, monks used the silence forced upon them to craft a language both precise and poetic. You pause and breathe. In through the nose, hold for 3 beats, then exhale slowly through the mouth. Notice how your own breath feels louder in stillness, almost like an intruder. And in that awareness, you understand why silence itself became sacred here. There is a story, half anecdote, half legend, of a monk at the Abbey of St. Gall. He was known for never breaking silence, even when rules permitted him to speak. Instead, he developed a gesture so subtle it was almost invisible. A tiny shift of his thumb, a barely perceptible tilt of his head. Other monks said he could communicate entire thoughts with the smallest movement. It was said that he could make silence speak louder than words. Perhaps it was exaggeration, or perhaps it was proof of how deeply they mastered this quiet language. Nietzsche once wrote, "Those who were seen dancing were thought insane by those who could not hear the music." Here the music was silence, and those outside these walls would never understand its melody. But silence wasn't just a tool, it was a teacher. In its vastness, monks learned the discipline of attention. Imagine living day after day, year after year, where every sound, a falling spoon, a creaking door, a crow's distant call, felt amplified. You would begin to notice what others ignore. The way someone's footsteps change when they are tired, the shift in breathing that hints at joy or sorrow. In this way, silence sharpened their perception, making them more aware of each other and of themselves. Step gently now into the chapter where they stored their food. A dim room lined with barrels and woven baskets, filled with the earthy scent of grain and apples. You glimpse 2 monks across the room. One points to a barrel, then rubs his fingers together in a spiral. The other nods, moving toward the herbs. You realize it's a recipe unfolding, an entire meal prepared without a single word. And yet, even in this quiet communion, there were moments of rebellion. One parchment fragment tells of a novice who deliberately used the wrong signs, causing small, silent chaos in the kitchen. A missing loaf of bread, misplaced herbs. Eventually he confessed, not in words, but by tracing the sign for "Forgive me" across his chest. A soft, almost humorous reminder that even in silence, human mischief finds a way. Feel your shoulders relax now. Let them drop away from your ears. Inhale once more, and as you exhale, imagine your thoughts settling like dust on a sunlit windowsill. Still, the vow of silence had its price. Some monks described a strange dizziness that came after long periods without speech, as if their minds sought release and found none. Psychologists today call it sensory deprivation light. Your brain, starved of interaction, starts inventing its own. It whispers phantom sounds. It conjures faint, imagined voices. Silence, prolonged and deep, can border on the hallucinatory. Was this why monks often spoke of visions? Were they mystical experiences, or the mind's coping mechanism? No one can say for certain. Scholars argue endlessly, and yet perhaps it doesn't matter. In the end, silence made room for the unseen, whether divine or imagined. You move closer to the abbey's inner chapel. The air grows denser, heavier with centuries of prayer. The stone arches above feel impossibly tall, stretching like the ribs of a slumbering giant. Here monks prayed without sound, their gestures slow and reverent. One monk would lift his hands, palms outward, signaling supplication. Another would draw a cross over his heart, a gesture of surrender. Together they created a silent liturgy, a choreography of devotion. And even though no word was spoken, the chapel felt full of intention, full of presence. Breathe softly and feel your own chest expand, as if echoing those long-forgotten prayers. Silent language became more than utility. It became identity. To speak in signs was to belong. To break silence unnecessarily was to fracture that delicate web of trust. It was more than a rule. It was the monastery's heartbeat. Outside, the night deepens. A faint breeze carries the scent of damp stone and blooming herbs. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls, its solitary sound punctuating the vast hush. And you realize this is what the monks must have felt. An entire universe in a single, quiet moment. Soon you'll see how this language moved beyond necessity, weaving itself into rituals, mysteries, and even secret debates carried on without sound. For now, you keep walking, deeper into the monastery's silent soul. You descend deeper into the monastery, stepping into a long, narrow corridor lined with cells. Simple rooms with nothing but a wooden bed and a small table. The air here is still, heavy with the faint scent of candle wax and ink. Each cell is a world unto itself, a place where monks spent hours in prayer, meditation, and the slow unraveling of thought. Here, silence wasn't merely practiced, it was perfected. And in that perfection, the monks found ways to converse about matters too subtle for speech. Silent debates took place in the refectory, in the cloister walks, even in the chapel itself. With a few gestures, they could argue theology, share scripture references, or even express disagreement, though always with grace. Imagine it, two monks sitting opposite each other at a long wooden table. One makes a sign for truth, a simple motion of the hand to the brow, then down to the heart. The other responds with a sign for doubt, fingers splayed in the air like scattered leaves. Back and forth they go, a conversation of ideas unfolding wordlessly. You almost feel as if you could hear it, but what you're hearing is only the echo of your own curiosity. Breathe in slowly now. Let your lungs fill, then hold the air for a count of 4 before you release it. Notice how the quiet stretches around you, like a blanket woven from the absence of sound. There's a peculiar story about a monk in Cluny Abbey, known only as Brother Marcus. He was said to be so skilled in silent debate that he once convinced an entire chapter of monks to change their fasting rules without uttering a single word. Legend says he crafted a chain of gestures so intricate it resembled a dance, a moving tapestry of logic. Historians remain unsure whether this was truth or myth, but one surviving note describes him as a man whose silence spoke louder than any sermon. Jung once said, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order." In the monk's silence, there was a secret order, an invisible architecture of meaning. What seemed like nothingness to outsiders was, in fact, a cathedral of thought. This language didn't only bind the monks to each other, it bound them to time itself. By staying silent, they slowed life's frantic pace, making each moment stretch. A gesture wasn't hurried, it was deliberate. Even the smallest sign carried weight because it was rare. You too can feel this slowing. Let your shoulders drop, your jaw soften, your mind loosen its grip. You walk toward the scriptorium now, the room where manuscripts were copied. The scratching of quills is the only sound, rhythmic and soft. At one table, a monk gestures to another, pointing first to a margin, then tracing a spiral in the air. You understand, he's asking for clarification on a note, perhaps an error in the text. The other monk nods silently and returns to his writing. And yet silence didn't mean the absence of personality. Even within these quiet walls, humor thrived. One anecdote tells of a monk who mischievously invented a false gesture, something that looked convincing but meant nothing. He taught it to a novice, who then used it repeatedly, unknowingly, saying nonsense during mealtime. The older monks tried not to laugh, but even in solemnity, a faint smile would flicker. Silence could be sacred, but it could also be playful. You can almost hear a soft chuckle in the stillness, like a breeze through dry leaves. It reminds you that even in vows of austerity, humanity endures. Let's pause for a small body awareness cue. Feel your hands resting wherever they are. Notice their weight, the way your fingers naturally curve. Are they warm, cool, tense? Let them soften. But not all silence was chosen willingly. Prolonged wordlessness could be a prison as much as a path. Some monks wrote in their diaries, always secretly, since personal writing was often discouraged, about feeling the edges of their sanity blur. Without speech, without sound, they began to lose the borders of their own identity. Was the vow of silence a discipline or a slow unmaking of the self? Historians still debate this. Perhaps it was both. In the late hours when the monastery slept, some monks would sneak into the cloisters and trace their gestures into the moonlight, as if speaking to an invisible companion. A few confessed, again, silently, to seeing visions, saints, angels, or even their own shadows moving independently. Was it holiness or the quiet undoing of a restless mind? You glance through an arched window and see the moon hanging low over the courtyard. Its light spills across the stone floor like pale milk, and you realize how profoundly these men lived in the in-between, between speech and silence, between certainty and doubt, between the earth and the divine. The kitchen bell rings faintly in the distance, a signal for the night meal. Monks gather in silence, their bare feet brushing against the cold floor. One monk raises 2 fingers, signaling prayer. Another passes bread, his hands making a gesture for blessing. In this quiet ritual, even eating becomes sacred. There's a curious connection here to modern psychology. Some therapists have explored the power of silence in sessions, letting patients sit with their thoughts unspoken until the truth emerges. In a way, the monks discovered this centuries earlier. They believed silence revealed what words could not. You're reminded of the earlier gestures you saw in the garden, the small motion over the lips, the hand over the heart. They return to you like faint echoes, connecting each part of this monastery into one seamless tapestry. And so, you keep moving through the halls, deeper still, knowing you are approaching the hidden heart of this silent world. Soon you will see how this language touched the sacred, how it shaped prayer, ritual, and perhaps even the divine itself. For now, let your breath slow. Let your mind quiet. Let the hush of the monastery seep into you like a gentle tide. You step beyond the scriptorium and into the chapel, the spiritual core of the monastery. The vast stone walls rise high, disappearing into the dim shadows of the vaulted ceiling. Candles flicker along the altar, their tiny flames trembling in the stillness. The faint scent of incense lingers in the air, a sweet, smoky thread winding through the silence. Here, silence is no longer just a tool for discipline. It becomes sacred. It becomes the bridge between the human and the divine. The monks gather for midnight prayers, each one cloaked in the same stillness you now carry in your breath. And yet they need to communicate. How do you signal that it is time to bow, to kneel, to turn the page of the Psalter when no voice is allowed? They use gestures so subtle they barely ripple through the air. 2 fingers drawn across the chest means kneel. A slight tilt of the head with a hand raised means rise. To point toward heaven is to indicate a hymn. The flow of their silent language becomes a choreography, a soft dance of hands and eyes guiding an entire room of souls without breaking the holy hush. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the candlelight casting long shadows across the chapel floor. Breathe in deeply, feeling the coolness of the stone around you. As you exhale, imagine the silence deepening, wrapping you like a cloak. There's an obscure historical note about Cistercian monks who developed what was called the angelic dialect, a special set of silent signs used exclusively during the most sacred rites. These signs were believed to mirror celestial movements, gestures that reflected how angels communicated. Some chroniclers claim they saw monks enter trances during these rituals, their hands moving as if guided by something beyond themselves. Was it true mysticism or simply the power of collective imagination? Historians are still unsure. Caught between reverence and skepticism, Nietzsche once whispered through his writings, "Silence is worse. All truths that are kept silent become poisonous." But for the monks, silence was not poison, it was purification. They believed that every spoken word risked contamination by ego, pride, or error. Only in silence could the soul listen properly to God's voice, or at least to its own faint inner echo. You notice a monk at the back of the chapel, standing perfectly still. His hands are clasped, but his fingers are slowly tracing a gesture in the air, like a prayer that has no sound. You feel a strange pull, as if this silent ritual contains something deeply human, an instinct to connect, even when words fail. Let your own body relax. Notice your breath again, this time feeling how it enters the tip of your nose, cool, then leaves slightly warmer. Focus on that gentle rhythm. In these sacred hours, the monks believed silence could blur the boundaries of self. Without words to anchor identity, without noise to distract, the ego loosened. Some monks wrote of feeling as if they dissolved into the collective presence of the community, or even into something far larger, an ocean of the divine. But silence was not without danger. There's a story about Brother Joachim, who after years of nightly vigils without uttering a single word, began to lose his sense of reality. He claimed he could hear the walls breathing. He said he saw visions of saints who whispered, not with mouths but with silent flames of light. The abbots debated whether this was sainthood or madness. No one reached a conclusion. Outside, the wind shifts softly through the cloister garden. You imagine the leaves rustling but making no sound, as if the silence has swallowed even nature. The moonlight spills through the stained glass windows, painting fragments of blue and gold across the cold stone floor. Everything here feels suspended, caught between time and eternity. And it's not just about reverence. There was a practical side too. In large monasteries, the silent language allowed hundreds of monks to live together with minimal confusion. A flick of the fingers could request bread during a meal, signal an error in a chant, or quietly warn a brother of approaching guests. It was efficient, quiet, and deeply respectful of the vow they had chosen. Yet you can't help but sense the irony. By trying to avoid the noise of the world, they created a new kind of noise, one that lived only in the mind. The gestures became an inner dialogue, a language that required constant attention, constant translation in the silence of thought. Here's your moment to pause again. Feel the weight of your eyelids. If they want to close, let them. Notice the faint hum of your own existence, the way your heartbeat sounds from within. There's an almost humorous anecdote that survives from a medieval manuscript. During one midnight vigil, a novice monk misunderstood a gesture and accidentally sat down when everyone else was kneeling. Too embarrassed to correct himself, he remained seated for the entire prayer. Afterward, an older monk silently tapped his shoulder and made the gesture for wakefulness, a polite way of saying, "Pay attention, brother." The novice blushed, but the older monk smiled. Even in silence, kindness could be shared. As you drift through this imagined chapel, you feel how these gestures wove a hidden tapestry of life. They didn't just replace speech, they transformed it. Each motion was deliberate, infused with meaning, stripped of the casual wastefulness of ordinary words. And now, you find yourself moving toward the most private spaces of the monastery, where silence touches something even more mysterious. Beyond the chapel lies the sacristy, and beyond that, the chapter house where monks confess their faults, not with words, but with the smallest motions of hands and eyes. There, silence becomes a mirror. You're about to witness how this quiet language shaped the monks' inner lives, how it blurred the line between self and soul, between discipline and longing. And in that final layer, you may find a reflection of your own silent places, the thoughts you never speak, the gestures you never show. Take another slow breath. You are almost at the heart of their secret. The chapter house is dimly lit, its circular space echoing faintly with the weight of history. You step softly across the worn stone floor, noticing how every sound, every footfall feels amplified, even though the air is still. Here is where the monks gather for their most intimate, silent rituals of honesty. They sit in a half circle facing the abbot, cloaked in their robes, their faces calm but their eyes alive with quiet intensity. No one speaks here unless absolutely required. Even confessions are stripped of spoken words. If a monk has broken a rule, forgotten his fast, daydreamed during prayer, or allowed a sinful thought to linger, he doesn't announce it aloud. Instead, he performs a simple gesture. He kneels, touches his chest with one hand, and lowers his gaze. The others understand immediately. A shared nod or a soft sign of forgiveness follows, and no word needs to be uttered. It's here you realize that silence doesn't erase communication. It distills it. It reduces it to essence. Imagine the strange psychological effect this must have had. Without the clutter of daily chatter, every movement gained weight. A single glance could feel like a sentence. A small motion of the hand could feel louder than a shout. Silence was not emptiness. It was a magnifying glass, amplifying meaning. You take another slow breath, noticing how your body feels heavier now, as if the stillness of this place has wrapped around your bones. The monks believed this was the path to humility, that when you strip away language, you also strip away pride. Without words, you can no longer decorate yourself with cleverness or disguise your faults. You simply are. There's an old, almost forgotten anecdote about a monk named Brother Elred. He lived in silence for so long that when he finally spoke, just a single sentence during a rare ritual, his voice startled the entire room. Some said it sounded like the crack of ice on a winter lake. Others swore it was soft as a dying ember. No one could agree. Historians who read his records still argue whether the silence preserved the purity of his words or made them impossible to truly hear. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." In this monastery, silence forced both. Without external noise, the monks turned inward, where dreams and awakenings often blurred. You imagine the long hours they spent in contemplation, fingers tracing prayer beads without a sound. Did their minds wander? Did they imagine voices that were not there? Some psychological theories suggest that sensory deprivation, even mild, can heighten inner imagery. Perhaps in their silence, they saw visions brighter than anything words could ever describe. There's a slight irony, too. By forbidding speech, they created a community more deeply attuned to nonverbal nuances than most of us will ever know. They could tell who was weary just by the way a hand trembled. They could sense joy in the soft angle of a brother's shoulders. They read entire emotional worlds in silence. Close your eyes again. Feel the stillness in your own body. Notice the gentle pulse in your fingers or at your temples. It's a small, steady rhythm, like a hidden drum. And now you're invited to step into the final layer of the silent language, the solitude of the monk's own cell. Imagine sitting there alone, a single candle flickering beside you, a small wooden cross on the wall. No one is there to see your gestures, no one to share the signs. What is silence when it has no audience? Does it dissolve into nothing, or does it deepen into something unspoken even to yourself? Some monks describe their solitude as peaceful, like sinking into a warm ocean of thought. Others described it as terrifying, like staring into a bottomless well. This is the ambiguity historians still debate. Did silence bring enlightenment, or did it erode the fragile scaffolding of the mind? Perhaps it did both. Let your breath soften. Feel your shoulders releasing any tension, as if gravity has gently doubled. It is here, in this private space, that the monk's silent language turns inward. No more gestures for others, only subtle movements of the soul. They practiced an interior dialogue with God or with the void. Perhaps they began to understand that even words within the mind are still words, still noise. True silence, they believed, was beyond thought. And then comes a quiet joke, if you can call it that. A fragment from an old Cistercian manuscript mentions a novice who fell asleep during silent meditation and accidentally invented a new gesture, his head nodding so dramatically that it knocked over his candle. The elders reportedly laughed, not out loud, but with a silent shaking of their shoulders, which was their only allowed form of humor. Even in strict silence, humanity found a way to smile. As you sit in this imagined cell, you feel how the layers of silence accumulate like fine dust. Each one softens the edges of the world a little more. You realize you've been breathing slower, thinking slower. The monastery has seeped into you. And now, after this long journey through the monks' wordless nights, you understand their paradox. Silence wasn't just the absence of speech. It was a language more profound than any tongue. A language of presence, of intention, of being. You've wandered from the cloisters to the refectory, through the chapel and the chapter house, and finally here, into the innermost sanctuary of the human spirit. And as you leave, you carry a strange sense of peace. Take one last slow inhale, hold it for a soft moment, then let it go, feeling your body sink deeper into rest. Because like those monks, you too have learned something about the quiet, about how it shapes you, how it reveals you, how it softens you into sleep. You are back in your own room now. No monastery, no cloistered hallways, no stone walls echoing with candlelight. Just the faint hum of whatever surrounds you. Maybe a fan, maybe the soft creak of your house settling. Notice how different the silence feels now. It's lighter, less heavy with history, but still full. You've wandered through centuries of quiet rituals, gestures in the dark, and the strange ways humans find to speak without sound. Maybe you'll remember one of those gestures, the way a monk tapped his chest to confess, or how a single hand raise could move an entire room. Maybe you'll forget them all, letting them dissolve like dust in the morning light. Either way, the silence has done its work. So let your eyes soften. Let your breath become so gentle it almost disappears. Let your body sink into whatever holds it. And if your thoughts wander toward monks, toward mysteries, or toward nothing at all, know that it's okay. There's nowhere else to be, nothing else to do. Just you, floating now in the quiet. Sweet dreams.